Hello, everyone. Welcome to A Day in the Life. This is where we introduce you to the companies and individuals who bring the magic to life. I'm Kelly Bailey.
And I am Kathy Dixon. And today we're speaking to three wonderful guests from Valtech's Themed Entertainment Studio. We're speaking to Erica McKay, Stosh Noga, and Eric Soto. Welcome to A Day in the Life. And we're super thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much for having us.
We're very excited.
So I suppose we should just kind of dive down into it. We would love to hear how each one of you ended up entering into the field and kind of like your background getting to where you're at currently at Valtech. How about we start with Erica?
Okay. So I've always loved going to theme parks, but I had no idea that it was a career until my mid-20s. So I actually started I worked at a manufacturing company managing their manufacturing processes, and I also did live theater. And it was really when I got into scenic design for theater that I fell in love with that space, with creating that magic. But more than just the show we were putting on, it was really about that environment that the actors were playing in and creating that space. And even in one show, we had the curtain break and the audience members came up afterwards to take pictures with the set. And that was really the pivotal moment for me where I was like, I don't want this to last for just a couple weekends. I want this to be permanent. I want to create these beautiful worlds that people can explore. And that was how I found the Themed Entertainment Association, which is absolutely pivotal in being part of this industry. And in 2013, I went to the TEA Summit down in Anaheim. I was living up in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I'm from, and I had no idea what it was at all. I just bought the ticket on a whim and went down and figured I'll just meet whoever I can and see what is this industry like and how could I possibly fit into it. And it was through that I met some super amazing people, including some of my closest friends today, as well as I ended up meeting through a friend that I met just that weekend, introduced me to Mark Woodbury at Universal Creative. And I met him earlier in the evening, but then ran into him again at 12:30 in the morning at House of Blues in downtown Disney, and ended up having an impromptu interview in the middle of House of Blues, and talked with Terry Koo and some other really amazing folks from Universal. And that was how a few interviews later and a couple months later, I ended up moving down to Southern California and starting on the Wizarding World of Harry Potter at USH. So that was my very first project in the industry. And I was hired to manage all of the animated figures and work with the different vendors and make sure that we went from getting the contracts in place all the way through everything installed and tested and working. But about a month in, they came to me and said, hey, you have a creative background. We have these interactive wands that we really want to make a part of our Hollywood park. They've been developing them in Orlando for Diagon Alley. And we need to figure out how they're actually going to fit into Hogsmeade for us, because our Hogsmeade, each one of them are a little bit different. And so in addition to managing the animated figures, I got to then figure out what is that experience? And that was really my first step into interactives and thinking about what are the guests going, like what spells are they going to cast? Where will they cast them? What magic will happen when they cast that spell? About half of them we were able to take or reuse from the other park, but we had to come up with some brand new ones. So that was sketching stuff out and trying to get it approved by the IP holder as fast as we possibly could, because construction was already happening and making changes when conduit was in the ground. And that was just a really, really amazing experience to wear all those different hats and see interactives from start to finish, the whole process of how that experience came to be. And when that project ended, my awesome boss came to me and he's like, all right, you can stay in Hollywood with us and become a manager for animated figures on the next project here, or you can leave us and move to Orlando and work for Creative out there on brand new interactive experiences. And I was like, put me on a plane. And I loved being at USH, but I was really, really excited to be a part of this brand new group that was starting in Orlando called Advanced Technology Interactives, and work on actually a bunch of different interactive experiences that I hope someday come to be. But I was specifically assigned to Super Nintendo World, and I did that for about 4 years, which was absolutely amazing. And I was one of the lead designers for all of the Landwide game that happens in Super Nintendo World. And through that, was able to meet the fantastic folks at Valtech, who were MJD at the time, and have them be one of our awesome vendors on that project. And so when COVID layoffs happened, I was really happy to receive a call from some of the people I had already loved working with, giving me an offer to jump over.
That is like an amazing story. And to like start off with doing the one and also just like that's just amazing, honestly. Yeah. Anyway, I feel like that's like the place to start in your career, and it just kind of is magic from there. It's almost poetic. So let's see. Should we go on
The Stosh.
to Stash? Yes.
All right.
Why don't you tell us what you've been what took you and brought you to Valtech, your path?
Oh, the whole path. All right. Well, that's going to be fun. So I started out as a Disney kid. I've been here every year since I was 6 months old, coming to Disney World on family vacation. And at one point in high school, I learned about the college program, which is basically your first cutting your teeth internship with Disney. I was like, I'm going to do that. So as soon as I got to college, finished my first year, applied for the Walt Disney World College program, went and had a great summer, actually met my now wife in the college program. So we have a long standing history with Disney. And so we agreed that, we finished the college program. We both love Disney. We tried to focus on moving back to both of us to Orlando. And we finished school, and we were kind of working at Disney on the side. And then 9/11 happened. And that kind of took us back up to DC, where I did a decade with the government in SIGINT. So that's collecting data about people. And then I heard about magic bands, and I was like, this is what we do. Like, I build profiles on people all the time. Like, I want to get involved again. So I tried to convince my company to do it. That didn't quite work out. They wanted to stay focused on government. So I started applying on my own, and eventually came back to join Walt Disney World Scientific Systems, which is a kind of side gig to Imagineering. They kind of take things from proof of concept, it works, to it works 365, 24/7. High availability, which is what you need for theme parks. And it's been growing ever since then. I spent about 6 years doing all of the behind the scenes analytical tools for design and engineering engineers, creating bespoke software applications. And then I decided that I really wanted to do the guest facing stuff and have fun. So I started looking for opportunities within Imagineering. And my first project was actually NBA Experience, which is now closed. Take that for a grain of salt. The technology behind it was what was really fun. And what we did in there with the 13 interactive attractions was a springboard to what would be coming down the road in places like Epcot. And I really loved it. Seeing the people interact with something and know that they're going to be able to build on their experience the next time back. Not all of us are lucky enough to kind of jump in with a wand like Erica. But, I jumped in with the basketball. We did lots of really cool tracking, really, really cool time of flight tracking, and different analytics on that in real time in a game engine. So when they asked me to come on to another project that was going to be opening at Epcot, I jumped on that. That kind of brings us forward to March of 2020, actually Friday the 13th, if you will. Disney decided that we were all going to go work from home. And that was, kind of a sad day. Friends are what make this industry. I've always loved all the teams I work on, and I'm a big people person. So kind of going into the Batcave here was a little bit frustrating. But we kept working. I converted my bike shop here at the house into a full test suite for upcoming attractions. My kids were play testers. So it's really just that wanting to push the bar forward and love of the industry that's kept me in here for so long. Um, so 2020 went by very slowly, and eventually I joined. Well, we had met Eric at Valtech while we were working on that last project, and my wife was laid off from Disney, and we decided that she would be stay at home. I wanted to do something a little bit more stable, so I actually jumped to the game industry with EA Games for a short bit. And about 3 months into that, Eric contacted me and said, "Hey, we're standing up a themed entertainment studio. Are you?" And he didn't even finish the sentence before I was like, "I'm in. I'm there." So I joined Valtech Themed Entertainment Studio as an engineering lead, and we've been doing really cool stuff ever since.
That is so ridiculously amazing. Like, it's so cool. All right, Eric.
Thank you. So I probably have the most typical sort of enterprise technology background. I started young when I was a teenager, and I'm not going to reveal my age because who wants to do that. But when I was a teenager, I wrote software for a flight school. I've always been into aviation, and I'm a pilot as well. Went to school for computer science and did the usual typical enterprise work. Always a theme park fan, of course. I've lived in Florida for 20 some years, so it's very easy for us to come to the parks often. But the parks at that point, the type of work that they had was very enterprise. Point of sale systems, databases for the usual things that weren't so exciting. Of course, that has since changed with interactive experiences. And so it really was amazing how in 2017 we had this opportunity to work with Universal and Super Nintendo World. And of course, we were looking at it as okay, it's an enterprise system. We need this, message bus and these other things. But it was just an incredible experience because the focus truly was how can a guest have the most fun, right? Whereas in other typical systems, you're thinking about like budgets or accuracy to the penny or whatever. In this case, we were like, how can we create the most fun experience? And so loved that work. And as we had an opportunity during COVID, of course, we slowed down as everybody did, but all these amazing people were out there. And so I took a risk internally and sort of networked a lot and tried to build the case that this is a great opportunity for us to not just do this work as something that's coming to us, but to very intentionally go out there and present ourselves as not just a shop that can do this work, but a creative a shop as well as a hardware and software technology shop. And so that's kind of brought us here. And now I've actually now in Orlando, I started this in Florida, way down south, and I've kind of kept making my way north, and I'm now here in Orlando. So it's a great opportunity. And of course, now with Erica and Stash, we've kind of grown that team tremendously.
I have so many questions. Not the least of which is your background.
Yes. So what's interesting is I've always been remote. I've in fact been a remote worker since the year 2000 or maybe 1999. So being
Yay.
remote to me has never been a new thing. what has been new is that it used to be like, oh, we have to include this guy on a call, or we have to get a video feed, or whatever. Now it's the opposite. So I'm like, okay, I need to differentiate myself from just being a person on a call. And so to me, the backgrounds like say a lot. And these days, of course, you go to YouTube and you see all these amazing creative people that are sharing, all kinds of things, and they have these amazing backgrounds. So I kind of got motivated one day and sort of figured out, okay, what's interesting. And my daughter and I were big into Star Wars. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and of course, being here in Disney and Batu and so on, it's like great opportunity and a great IP and theme to go with. So
That's awesome. I know
it
Kathy
drives
was also.
conversations a lot. I've had many clients quite literally just stop an official client call to just talk about something back there. So
Yeah, that's basically how I was looking. I was like, I originally saw the computer in the back. I'm like, oh, that's.
yes.
And then I saw the helmet, and then slowly I'm like, wonder if these are projects he's working on or
Yeah.
things he's interested in. So that's.
Bonus points to people that can tell what computer that is. I've had a few people that nailed it precisely. So
Do you have a guess, Kelly? It looks like a Mac, but I don't really know which
that's
model
good.
it is.
Good. Yeah, that one's a Macintosh 128. It was the original Mac, or
Yeah.
the second one that came out in 85, if I
Five.
recall. Or
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Oh my gosh, that's so amazing. So let's go back on track after I've
We
nerd out
have
about your
other.
background.
We have other backgrounds. Can we? I'm sorry. I just want to. I want to know. It looks like you're still kind of in your bike shop, Stosh.
Yep. Yeah, so some of the bikes have been moved out into the garage, but originally I've been a biker. I mean, since I broke the training wheels off. I mean, like, I love it. It's my go-to. Put a smile on my face, happy place. So in the background there is actually my wife's bike, and then some of mine are hanging on opposite walls. In all, I think there's 6 that are supposed to be in air conditioning. The Florida heat is absolutely horrible for bikes, so I built this little 100 square foot room to kind of control like dry rot and stuff like that, and keep the bikes in a more pristine environment. And then COVID, so I moved a ton of computers in here, and the bikes got bumped out again. So hopefully they'll make their way back in here someday.
I had no idea that bikes were so susceptible to heat. It
It's not that.
explains my childhood a lot.
Yeah, it's really the tires. Like I was
Mhm.
leaving them in the garage, and the constant fluctuations in temperature, like the tires were really dry rotting quickly, and the tires are like $60 a piece. So it was much cheaper to build this room and preserve those than replace tires all the time.
Got it. Erica. Caitlin said in our private chat that we should add this question to our permanent show outline. Like, what does your work from home studio office look like? Lilia, thank you for that, because it's super interesting. So now we get to talk about Erica's.
Okay. Well, we moved into this house a year ago, just before I started at Valtech, and knew I was going to have a permanent work from home situation. And the very, very first thing we did when we bought the house was paint that wall purple. I really, really love purple. And so that was a huge thing. And it just makes me happy every time I see in my reflection the purple behind me. And so I continued that theme of what are things that make me happy and remind me a lot of projects that I've done before. And so I've got like, there we go. The original wands that I used every single day on the construction site, as well as the wand that which was a Hawthorne Ollivander's original wand. It's like the smallest and easiest to stick in your sleeve. And then the Dumbledore's wand is the one I used to cast the very first working spell in Hogsmeade in Hollywood. And then I have a Luna wand back there, which was the one I bought when I finally got to USJ and got to see what that team had done, iterating on their version of the interactive wands. So. And then like a bunch of art books and theme park books and map of Super Nintendo World, my love, and some cool stuff from a project that we did at Valtech last summer with Young Innovators Academy for an interactive scavenger hunt.
Super, ridiculously amazing, and I am obsessed. I also saw the Mario and Luigi on Eric's, or is that just Mario and Mario? I saw two.
There's Mario and Luigi back there, and there's Magikarp, of course, which is
Yeah,
the weakest Pokemon of them all. But
it was my first one.
it's okay. We like Magikarp.
Okay. All right, now Kathy, get us back on track. I'm sorry we had to run down my
No,
brain.
it's usually a question that plays in my mind. I'm like looking at everyone's backgrounds and I'm like, oh, there's something cool there. But yes, I will. Let's get back on track and let's discuss the company overview. I know that as you had touched on, that Valtech is part of a larger studio or a larger company, and it's a subset of that. And if Stosh can tell us a little bit
Sure.
about Valtech overall.
Sure. So, I mean, Valtech globally is about 4,000 people, but really we're a subset of the San Diego office. And then most of our team is actually focused here in Orlando. And before we were Valtech, we were actually a smaller interactive shop called MJD. And um, coming into Valtech, I kind of learned all of the history and cool things that they did to catch the eyes of Valtech, the global company. One of the things that they pride themselves on is really the small but quickly developed interactives. So we had done some stuff for Disney. If you had ever heard of Ghost Post, that was done by NJD and Disney. You would actually sign up for mailings and have content delivered to you that you could assemble yourself at home and then have interactive experiences in the park, which is really, if you look at the timeline of how interactives have grown, is really, really one of the cool features. Bridging that gap between I'm just paying to be in the park for a day versus now I'm doing things at the park and at home. I really enjoy those types of experiences. Um, we did that. We did a couple of items for Comic Cons, Godzilla being one of those. Um, some of you might have seen, any of you that have daughters that love the American Girl. We did interactive experience for American Girl at one of their retail flagship stores. So, I mean, really, all of that led to us capturing the interest of Valtech. Valtech, Valtech purchased MJD, and then my cohort at Disney, Travis and I brought MJD Valtech in to do a project for Disney. Um, they had obviously been doing the work for Universal, and it's just kind of been a growing experience with us getting deeper and deeper into the theme park interactives. Um, now Valtech corporately does like a lot of retail and um, digital conversion, so that's their focus. Ours is really on theme parks and more precisely that interactive experience.
Oh my gosh, it feels like y'all are even now just kind of only scratching the surface of where it can go. I don't, I don't want to get like too deep and crazy. It just like,
No, I mean, I
not,
think we're really at like a crossroads, right? Because we do a lot of the software, and my shop is set up for obviously the hardware testing and integration. So that's kind of that next stone that we want to kick, is bringing more of that into the parks where we develop it and deliver it as a product.
oh my God, let's,
Yeah, and
okay.
for us, if I can sort of continue talking a little bit about the themed entertainment studio specifically, because as you can imagine, in a company of 4,000, you have varied skills of all kinds and units that focus on different things. So for us, really, the turning point was Super Nintendo World, and that experience was just not just amazing for our teams that worked on it, but also if you find the YouTube videos of people experiencing that. In fact, when the original video of the announcement with Miyamoto, creator of Mario, was out, I mean, I'm watching this at home because of COVID. I had not been able to travel. And, I have tears in my eyes seeing this whole thing being described, all the work we had spent for years putting together, and actually there and seeing people. So seeing people enjoy it. So for us, it really was, how do we take all of that and focus this small team into building this kind of work? It's one thing to do amazing digital experiences. It's one thing to do amazing retail experiences. Then it's yet another to be able to point to something physical and say, here, go to this world and become part of this. And so that really is the sort of evolution of the company, and TS now is an important component of that. A small component, of course, compared to the whole rest of the company, but an important one at that. And mind you, out of all the case studies you can read in a company like ours, you can imagine, ours are just very fun and exciting, and it's hard not to be passionate about the case studies.
Okay, so knowing that it's like scratching the surface and that like how much y'all have already been involved with, like what are some of the other things that TES offers?
So
Like the
we
service.
So we break our services into three little buckets, but really it's the holistic physical interactive experiences. And the first one that we think about is under the creative umbrella, where we do blue sky interactive concept development. We do writing, both narratives and show writing, and also specifically interactive writing for allowing for branching storylines. And the game design itself, the physical in-person game design, and thinking through the big picture and all of the little details, doing those game design documents, and what happens if the guest does this, how will something react, and communicating that over to the technical team to make sure that they know what to actually build to make the creative happen. And so that second bucket is under technical. So our team, especially Stosh leading us in the hardware and Eric leading us a lot on the software side, is looking at, well, now how do we manifest that story and that creative direction to make sure that the experience is fun and playable and robust? And so that's everything from the physical items a guest might touch, through a back-end system that connects everything together, runs the game logic, analytics that feed back into it, and making sure that we take data and really use it to activate the experience and make it meaningful. And then prototypes and play testing so that we can ensure that it's going to work ahead of time and do really quick turnaround to understand what's going to happen. And then the last one is integration. And that's the installation, that's the project management. We run Agile, so we do 2-week sprints for a lot of our projects, and also live ops. We do a lot of support of something after it opens, and making sure that the whole thing from start to finish, blue sky through installation and beyond, is really enjoyable both for the guests and also for our clients and partners who we work with. And we really, really just love working with a whole variety of different companies, including the owners, but also the vendors. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention one thing, which is during the hiring process, my favorite thing that Eric told me was that Valtech hires people for their brains. And I couldn't, it couldn't be more true, that it's not about the way something has been done. It's about the possibilities and the way that we can think of something could be done. And so we apply that to every one of those capabilities of, we know what we've done, we've applied what we've done, but what could we do? What amazing experience could we create?
So
really, to add to
deep.
that, our jobs are so much about taking something that's ordinary and using it in a non-conventional way, which is really frustrating to manufacturers, because we're like, I want 2 of these. Can you support them for 10 years? These are the interesting conversations we have.
Yeah, and what's interesting to add to what Stash was just saying is that the technology, in a lot of cases, is invisible. It's not supposed to be there, right? The experience with Wizarding World, like, it's magic, right? There's no technology there. And at Super Nintendo World, you're just punching a block. I mean, there's, again, no technology. So a lot of times there's that important consideration of, yes, there's a ton of technology making this happen, but it can never be really felt anywhere. It has to be completely 120% invisible. which, as you can imagine, can be a challenge when you then have to consider things like budgets and timelines and other teams and so on.
All right. So now, now that my brain is all over the place thinking about your hiring process, because the to me makes the most sense. You're not hiring people for what has been done in the past. You're hiring people for what you can create together, and that's that's literally sweet and beautiful all at the same time, and I appreciate that so much. Um, okay, besides that, how can you describe like what you do on like a daily basis? I know it's like everybody wears all these hats, but like can we can we start with Erica maybe?
Sure. So each of us kind of leads those three different the different parts of those disciplines. So what I said about all of our creative services, that's my job. So that's what I do. I actually, while I was at Universal, went back to school for my MFA in creative writing. So I've been really fortunate to be able to spend a lot of my time doing writing work, both for our themed entertainment and also supporting some of our other work at Valtech globally, and doing some promotional videos for them and their retail things as well. But one of the biggest things that I get to do is really think about what are those interactive experiences, both for projects that we do internally, like the scavenger hunt for young innovators, or for some of our clients. I've gotten to continue some of my projects with Universal from the other side, which has been amazing to work with my awesome team again and be able to just think through in excruciating detail how are we going to make this experience happen, and how to make it more amazing for both the guest and for the operators and people working on it. And so it's really everything from detailed game design to big picture thinking of what is the next experience that we can do.
And let's hand over to Sash.
Sure. So, I mean, for me on the technical side, my goal is to think about a lot of the what ifs in terms of throughput. So when you start thinking about attractions, you're looking at something that could run anywhere from 10 to 20 years. And with that, you have to kind of pre-mitigate a lot of issues that might come up. For instance, you might have a game that runs and you have new security requirements that slow down the processing on that machine. So you have to think about that ahead of time and kind of build some of those factors up, which leads to more costs at the forefront, but it allows you to run things for the lifespan that they need to in a park. Sadly, people's attention spans these days fall off sooner than the capabilities of the hardware. So a lot of things will probably only run maybe 5 to 10 or 15 years, as opposed to those big 20 or 30-year runs. But really, my job is to just kind of think about that big picture, the infrastructure. My career has always been focused on kind of repeatable process and deployment, both with the government and in theme parks. Making those decisions early on that allow us to deploy something reliably, repeatably, and consistently, so that each guest gets the same experience, or in our case, because things are so dynamic, each guest gets a different experience. Those are the really tricky and really fun ones. And then correlating all of that with new technologies that are making their way into the theme parks, which, when I was young, we parked the car, we didn't read the newspaper, we just enjoyed Disney for a week. But now everybody's in the queue with their phone. So how do we extend that experience to include their mobile device in a meaningful way, so that they're not just checking Facebook or email or whatever the case may be? So that involves a lot more testing and integration to keep that reliability as high and as believable as it has been in the past. So yeah, that's kind of where I live.
So, do you believe that having your phone is helpful or just another fabulous tool that you can end up utilizing in order to be part of the storytelling?
So it's really tricky, right? I mean, you can definitely extend the story, and that's where I really rely on Erica. But I mean, if you asked me 10 years ago, I was vehemently against introduced. Like, I grew up in a way that my family connected like tightly on this trip every year. And now I've watched, with my own family, us kind of not get those same bonds that we did on vacation when I was young. So now I try to play the games with my kids more and create my own character. And like I'll play Pokemon Go. Like I'll go out with my son or my daughter and collect Pokemon, and that was just beyond my time, right? I grew up with the original Super Mario Brothers, and Pokemon was kind of at the tail end of it. But I think we all grow in different ways, and I don't think there's a way to avoid it. I think the biggest thing we need to do now is make sure that when we do create those experiences, they work on older devices for as long as possible, because kids always get the hand-me-downs, right? Like you don't give your kid the iPhone 13, you give your kid the iPhone 6. So how do you then include them in these next generation experiences that have a mobile component? And how to, like Erica, like when we did the an activity that we'll talk about later, we really needed an audio component. So there's all kinds of things you have to think about in order to make the experience believable and enjoyable by everyone.
Yeah, for me, phones really have to just be used in a smart way that support the story and not forced in because they have to be. So on Nintendo, it was a huge thing for us at Creative to make sure that the phone was a pause screen and not a game, so that it was something that supported your in-park experience. It gave you a chance to check how you were doing, but it was not required, and it wasn't going to draw a huge amount of your attention. And that is just really a smart way, in my opinion, to use the phone and have it still be a part of it without taking over.
Yeah, and I think that intention is important, right? To make sure that the device is weaved into the story and used in a smart way and adds value to the story. But also, you cannot just make it about the device, because for those that don't want to use the device, you don't necessarily want to make the story a lot less for them either. So it sounds like, oh, this should be a simple problem to solve. But in fact, when you go at it intentionally with a lot of consideration, you end up realizing that there's quite a bit of careful navigation to do in how you incorporate a device like that. But I agree with Stash's point earlier that ultimately you have, in the case of Super Nintendo World, this amazing land and and physically there, right? And there's a lot of visual not visual effects, but there's a lot of visual components that make that land incredible. And the last thing you want is somebody, sitting like this instead of looking around. So the decision for that, the pause screen concept that Erica was describing is brilliant in that case, because you really do want people to experience the land. Having said that, again, there's a way to do this. It just needs to be something that happens intentional, that happens as part of the creative process very early on, and not just an afterthought, 2 months before opening the park. And oh crap, we need a mobile app. Let's slap one together. So not that anyone's done it, but by the way, this is not an actual comment. It's a general comment. But
We have lots of thoughts on this.
yes, clearly.
Clearly, it's always mobile first.
No, it makes sense that you guys are very passionate about this particular parts of an experience that you're building up. Let's also go over to Eric, and it seems as though you are kind of the person that pulls both of these two worlds together between Erica's job and also Stas's job.
Yeah, so what's interesting is that because we're a small team in what's otherwise a very large company, and we're a new team, it's almost like an incubator team, right? We wear many hats. So creative, hardware, software is constantly in all of our minds. Some of us are playing with this more or less, but it really is something that goes through all of our thinking, which is one of the reasons, again, going back to the brain comment, like really we wanted to have a team of people that could handle all of the moving parts. Now I'm officially director of technology, but my vision for this team is not limited by that title. And what I mean by that is that as a new team, we have to make things happen for us, not just externally with clients, but internally as well, right? We have to get the credibility of a larger company to say, yes, you know, this should be a team, and you should have more resources, and you should be able to bring in more team members, and so on. And so a lot of what I do is that, right, is making sure that we have good execution on projects, that we are constantly reaching out internally and externally. I work hand in hand with the business development team, of course, to make sure that we're constantly looking at new opportunities and trying to get ourselves in the right place to be recognized or offered the opportunity to work on different projects. But then for those projects that we work on, or now at the execution phase, right, we go into it with a partner mindset. And that's kind of one of my most important roles, is just to kind of make sure that we are always using the partner mindset. And what I mean by that is, we might have been hired for the creative or for the hardware or for the software, right? And you would think that, well, then the other pieces just are happening by someone else. But in fact, we've learned that always having a presence by all the team members and all the disciplines is important. So, for example, we might not have been hired for the creative, but we still have Erica's strong involvement in a project, because we know that that's going to help us produce a better value to our customer. Same with the hardware. Like, we might not have been hired for hardware, but we still have Stash involved in some of the hardware decision making, or at least some of the proposals, or helping the client make the right choice, and so on. And that's very important, because ultimately we can offer a complete package without necessarily having to go back to a customer with a Chinese menu and say, do you want A, do you want B, or do you want C? So they get our brains just as much. And so ultimately, my role is to make sure that we continue to grow as a unit. We continue to build amazing experiences for our customers, but we all still continue to have an incredible amount of fun, because at the end of the day, I don't want to come to a job that is a drag. I want to come to a job where I am excited every morning to sit at my desk, look at the toys, and feel like I'm making a difference in thousands of people's lives that are ultimately going to go to a themed experience and enjoy it just as much. And that's, you know, paramount.
Oh man. Like, y'all are gonna be flooded with resumes after this. Just a heads up. If because it feels like the culture there is supportive of, you know, not just a diverse group of people, but a diverse group of mindsets. And I think that that's very important, especially for being able to pivot with things that come up unexpectedly. I don't know. So one of our viewers, Eric, said that he would love to hear about, or hear everyone's thought on the metaverse and how it could impact location-based experiences in theme parks. And I thought it might be a good circle back for some things that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Erica, you want to take a first stab at that?
Oh, sure. I think in part it's kind of similar to our thought process about using mobile devices, but there's an extension to that of how can we use it in services story. It's probably not going away. But then I feel like in a lot of ways, the metaverse has always existed in different form factors of online RPGs and other ways that fans connect in that same IP universe and that fandom. And so maybe beyond like a dedicated metaverse, it's how do we connect together all parts of a fandom to create that entire, as one of our coworkers at Valtech says, David, a fan ecosystem. So how do we put all of that into one space for the guests to enjoy seamlessly?
So, I mean, I think to add to that, one of the big obstacles is overcoming the intellectual property rights, and how do we bridge that gap between the content owners and the metaverse? I think there's amazing capabilities. I mean, I would love to have a heads up display going through a theme park that told me ride wait times. That's just Intel. But when you start thinking about like more of that connected experience, that gets a little bit trickier. I'd love to have my avatar imported into a game. So I think they're solving those problems. And I think if there were really a consortium I think that's where you, like, if you could get everybody to agree, kind of like the smart homes, like everybody were to come up with a standard rule set, I think that's where you start seeing metaverse integrated into theme parks, because we're all playing with the same rules.
Yeah, and to me, what's really interesting, similar to mobile, that I had not actually made that connection until just now that Erica mentioned it. But I think that there needs to be an interplay between the virtual and the physical, enough that if I participate in the physical, I'm drawn to the virtual because there are some things there that will allow me to extend, but it also has to be the opposite as well, right? So I can learn some things in the virtual, but it drives me to the physical. I mean, ultimately, theme park operators, amusement parks, and so on, like, they still need you to go there, right? Obviously, that's the thing, and that we as humans will still continue to live in a physical world, right? I mean, uh, at least maybe in 100 years this will seem silly, but I think that so long as these things are interconnected well to be drivers of each other, I think it can be really interesting what you could do in the metaverse, in terms of virtual experiences that drive visits and vice versa.
That's sorry. I'm like, I feel like I could just listen to Eric talk all day. It's like, Eric, share your wisdom.
Imagine what this broadcast would be like, though, if we were all in VR, right? Like we'd see more than just our faces. It's
I'm
Walking
okay
around.
with a very specific camera view.
you
My
don't have
desk is
people
very
walking
messy.
around your office.
Very messy desk. It reflects my brain and just like 10 different things. No,
You know
100
that
different things going on at once.
Do you have to wear shoes in the virtual world? I haven't worn
I hope
shoes in
not.
like 2 years.
yes, there you go.
You'll see all of my post-it notes of like different things I need to do and sketches everywhere. So
I have
now
space
that
on my
we,
desk.
I
Yes.
mean, that works. Why not? But now that we've heard about what it is that what each of your roles are, can you share some of the projects that you've worked on and some of the experiences that you've worked on?
So almost everything that we do is under NDA, and we can't go into a huge amount of detail. So we were really fortunate a year ago to partner with Young Innovators Academy and do a completely non-NDA, something we own entirely. And it was actually, we did it for community service to give back to them. So it was pro bono. And we were able to test out ideas that we had for what a connected outdoor interactive experience could be that you can pick up and move and change the way that it's oriented each time that you play with it, and experiment on all of their kids. Because as you can guess from their name, Young Innovators, they're actually completely dedicated to innovation. So they're like, yes, please test on our children. And we worked with them for a 10-week summer camp with kids 5 to 11 years old. And I think we have a video.
Located?
Yeah, we have.
Yeah. So that's a video that they put together and put on their Instagram, but we felt like it really captured the spirit of the first few weeks. And we have some pictures from internal lunch and learn that we did at work that we feel like we can share with you of all the details of how we went through it if we want to go through those. But we really started with talking with young innovators about what would be beneficial to both sides, and how this was a great chance for all of us to explore, for them to really innovate with their summer camp program and get the kids outside, and for us to have a robust proof of concept that we actually iterated on every single week of the 10 weeks. There were all different themes and all different stories, and it was like a play test with 60 kids every week. So when we were working on what is this experience, because the requirements we were given by Young Innovators was it has to be outside and it has to match these 10 themes, the end, and be a scavenger hunt. It was really thinking about what would that experience be? What would be exciting? It's fun because it was the summer it's in Central Florida, in Oviedo, Florida. So it's hot, it's sticky, there are bugs, and we can't necessarily affect the natural wildlife in the space because we were using wilderness areas. So we need to make sure that we packed out everything. Nothing was staked into the ground. It was all mobile, and then put those themes into that space in a way that felt natural, but also didn't disturb the natural environment. And so it came down to 3 principles for each one of the games each week, which was the kids would search, and through whatever search and exploration and discovery, they would figure out an answer or do an activity that would result in them choosing one of 4 buttons, and that would unlock some piece of information that either helped them go to the next station or that they would collect together to build a word or phrase at the end of the experience. And for each of these 10 weeks, we made a different journal. Each of them was themed to the weeks. And some of them we even did multiple quest lines that were in parallel. So we'd split the kids into thirds, and they would use the same 8 stations, but in a different way and using a different story through their physical journals that they were holding. Some of my favorite weeks were Criminology and Archaeology, where in Criminology, they actually had to prove who was innocent by going to each station, and the result of the activity that they would do would tell them one more person that was innocent until they had marked all of them off and found the guilty party. And so here's some examples of the different activities that they were doing inside of the notebooks. So they had things like taking a red lens and doing a decoder on a picture, or in the engineering week, each one of the stations was set to a different type of engineering for them to explore, from structural to environmental to electrical, mechanical. And then an example of the Criminology week up there, where they had to find the fingerprints and match the fingerprints to prove that that person couldn't possibly have been the one that had done it. And in the Dinosaur week, learning about both general dinosaurs, but also ones that exist today, because Oviedo is flooded with chickens, which are a relative of the T-Rex. Fun fact. And it was really about finding all those different secrets using maps. In the Archaeology week, they actually had to do crayon rubbings and find all of the different artifacts. And that one I actually themed after the Seminole Native American tribe that is from this area, and different artifacts that were found in this region. So the kids had that connection to the space that they were physically walking in. And we made sure to, I have this creative philosophy. I actually did an article earlier this week about my 7 principles of creating immersive worlds and interactive worlds. And one of those that's very important to me is setting up the payoff. And as they would go through each of these stations and do them, there had to be something that brought it together. So there was that final puzzle that they were solving, but then a reward for finding that, so that the kids would be excited about that little carrot at the end of the stick to get them through it. And so
they were, right? I mean, they were. I mean, like the reward was a big driver for the kids.
Yeah, kids love. So most of the weeks we used just these necklaces that you see, these lanyards. Those are 3D printed, special custom 3D printed little light bulb shape because that's the logo for Young Innovators on one side, and the other side is a picture that's unique to the theme of each week and a color that's unique to the theme of each week, which carried through to all of the journals. And that was their little prize at the end. They got to wear that necklace and they got some stickers. And then actually in the 9th week, because again, these were like play tests and I was iterating every time, and I would plan ahead, but I would wait to make all the props and everything until the week of, which was maybe a bad idea, but it meant that I could pivot really fast when the kids told me something. So during the 9th week, the kids were like, I really wish that you gave us like toys or candy at the end. So in the 10th week, they got little toys. I wasn't going to go down the candy route, but they got little toys and they loved it. Being able to open the treasure chest and pick their toy at the end of the experience was their absolute favorite thing. And I actually pivoted the entire experience that last week to be about a treasure map and following each one of the stations so that it all led up to why they were finding that treasure at the end. It wasn't just a toy for the sake of it being a toy. So I'm going to kick it over to Stash. Talk about how we made it.
Yeah, sure. So we'll talk about development. So this is a fun one, right? We had a couple of requirements. We knew we would need a computer that could handle touch inputs, but more so, we needed a computer that could run in remote areas, and we didn't really want to lug a generator in, because not only would that mean gasoline and exhaust, it's also a safety hazard because of the heat. So we decided to use battery. So we developed a system that could run for 8 hours off of a single battery. And that battery actually drove a touchscreen, which we didn't take advantage of, but also the LEDs underneath each of the touch button lights. And we used a Raspberry Pi for just simple compute power, and it worked out really well. One of the things we did find, though, was that with some of the younger kids, I mean, kindergarten and pre-kindergarten even, reading levels weren't there. So we kind of had to pivot partway through and add speakers. So we looked at adding an amplifier with an internal speaker, and we still couldn't get the audio we needed. So we ended up going with off-the-shelf JBL Bluetooth speaker that worked very reliably. Sometimes to my dismay, when there's 10 of them on my test bench, all playing the same output continuously. That was interesting.
Which was my voice over and over again.
Yes.
Please
not that I mind the voice, but it's just when you hear 10 of them that are slightly out of sync because of the boot sequence, it's like, oh, so frustrating. So we can go to the, I think there's more slides here that we can kind of, yeah. So, I mean, we started out with a very simple budget, roughly $350 per box. That's a IP65 weatherproof enclosure because it rains in Florida. So we wanted to keep all of these electronics that we were building, keep them dry, as well as we had to buy the screens, the Raspberry Pis, all of the buttons, power cords. We actually had to buy and build those, bulkhead connectors so that we could charge the units in between each week. So for roughly $4,000, I think we built an absolutely incredible experience for the kids. And what really made it unique was the fact that we were able to update the experience every week through Eric's software. And I'll let him kind of jump into that next.
Yeah, and before pivoting into the software, though, what was interesting in terms of the hardware and the requirements is that ultimately, again, we were doing this as a way to give back to the community, but I also could not go, up to enterprise and say, hey, I'd like to spend, $200,000 on like pro grade equipment. So we built stuff that was driven by the requirement of the budget. $350 for each box was actually an incredible result for the quality that we got. The software was, it had to do two things, right? It had to detect the inputs on those buttons, which are physical Raspberry Pi, typical Raspberry Pi inputs and outputs. Also had to drive the lights, which ones are on and so on. At one point, we had a sequence of animations of lights that if you did something, they would sort of click back and forth. Very fun. But I think that ended up getting killed because of battery. Again, the box ran on battery. And when you have these relays coming on and off, like crazy, it was killing the battery.
When you
But
couldn't see them in the bright sun well
right,
enough, so it just ended up
exactly, and that was
being,
the other
yeah.
thing. Yeah, the other thing we learned tremendously is that these look great indoors, the buttons nice and bright, but when we take them in the sun in Florida, it's like, okay, well, I can't tell if that button is lit or not. Um, Regardless, the software was actually a browser. So Chrome running inside a Raspberry Pi, which actually worked incredibly well. And in fact, rather than relying on images, Erica would create video loops for us. So there was a video loop of the station before it was activated. Then when the guest, or the kid in this case, would put an RFID card or on top of the box would recognize someone's activating it. And then that gave the box a code of whether it would go on path A or path B or path C. We had the capability to do multiple paths. Some weeks we did multiples, other weeks it was just the same. Again, we iterated a lot based on what the kids were able to do, how long it took them, how satisfied they were at the end, and so on. But ultimately, that activation would cause another video to play, in this case, something like activating station, and then followed closely thereafter by a question. And the question in the later weeks was actually read, and so that those kids that weren't great readers could at the very least hear the question. And then each time they pressed a button, there's of course a wrong answer video loop, something like, "Oh no, try again." And of course, there was the right answer. Fantastic, you got it right. This is your clue, kind of video loop. And all of that worked tremendously well inside of a browser. Um, Web browsers have a thing about playing video automatically, but we overcame that. And of course, there was always a B show in all of these in case there was some issue or something didn't get recognized and so on. So you can see an image in there of Stash managing the RFID cards and burning them. Each week we would burn the cards to have codes, like which week we were in, and also which particular storyline that particular card was for. And again, we pivoted back and forth between multiples and singles. But the fact that we built it in a web browser, again, just like Erica was saying about maintaining the media, made it so that we could iterate very, very quickly. In fact, it was all driven from a spreadsheet. Erica would sort of tweak the storyline each week into a spreadsheet, and then I would load that spreadsheet into each of the boxes, and the spreadsheet essentially told the web application what to do and which videos to play and in what order and what would happen if you got it right, if you got it wrong, and so on and so forth. So highly configurable and easy for us to tweak and to change it around. The one interesting bit of all of this is how much the environment affects you. And the RFID cards and the Florida humidity and the boxes themselves was definitely an interesting challenge throughout the whole process. But again, $350 box, and then we still had an amazing experience for the kids in the end.
Yeah, so much testing.
Yeah, this is the testing suite. I mean, so every week we would load up the software, and we normally kept 2 spare boxes, and we had 8 that would, what we would call, go into production. And then, so we would test all of those. Normally I would ask my son to do it, where he would go through and play the game every week. And it worked out very well. We overcame a lot of our obstacles, adding desiccant packs to kind of absorb some of that Florida humidity and help out with keeping the boxes dry. Erica, do you want to talk about play testing?
Yeah. Well, so in addition to every single week being its own in production play test, we did play testing before the summer started, and that actually gave us a lot of quick answers. So we did paper play testing of just very quick, like, let's just tape it up to the wall and see what they do. We did testing of the boxes and the entire experience start to finish. And one of the big things that we learned from even just those early tests was that we needed to create some type of B show for if the boxes didn't work for whatever reason, humidity, whatever it was that might make one of them finicky that day. We were able to, our coworker Danielle, who was another huge part of this, she created these boards that the very first week we used one station to replace one of the boxes that had a problem that we weren't sure, and we had to figure out what it was for the following weeks. And so the kids could actually come up, find the question they were supposed to answer, and just flip over the tiles instead of pushing buttons. But then we didn't need it after that first week because we figured out what the problem was, and we actually reused it in the archaeology week on purpose as a go through the dig site and just turn over the tiles until you find the picture and find the answer, and then use the box. So it was really fun to learn those lessons early and be able to apply them and have something ready for the kids. So what did it all look like when we actually got out in the field? Well, the very first week, we picked a site that was a mile walk in, gorgeous, next to the river, beautiful trees. The young innovators said they wanted the kids to get outside and go hiking. We gave it to them, and we loaded everything up in these carts, and we hiked a mile in with those carts. And yeah, the kids didn't do so well hiking in. It took us 15 minutes. It took them an hour to hike in. And it was hot. Everyone got sunburned. It was a headache. So we actually pivoted for all the rest of the weeks and changed the locations we were going to make sure that everything was within a 5-minute walk of their bus. And it also meant a little bit easier for us to be able to set everything up and lug everything in. So here we are at that beautiful spot. It's gorgeous. This is a different one. This is a campsite. We actually rented a campsite at a wilderness area for one of them, which was really, really cool because it meant we had this whole private area, and they still had other hiking trails that they could go on after we were done. And this picture also shows one of the kids' absolute favorite activities, which was reaching in a box. So this was the Dinosaur week 3, and I had a little toy dinosaur inside of this package that was labeled like from Jurassic whatever, shipped to like fragile, do not break. And they would stick their hand inside and have to feel the dinosaur, and then they'd what? Willingly stick their hand inside. They had a picture of 4 dinosaurs in their journal, and they had to match up what they felt with what they saw. So just really taking those 2 senses and pairing them together, and then pick the correct answer. And that became an absolute favorite. So we kept repeating that mechanic every other week or so through the end of the summer. And at the end of the summer, when we did a survey, it was the top mechanic. Like the kids just really, really love reaching in somewhere they can't see.
It's an interesting lesson, right? Because like we're technology people, so we're always thinking technology, and that one's just like, okay, very simple mechanic. Feel what's in there, and it was super well received. So it's one of the cool learnings from that whole experience.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's definitely ways we can take it forward in the future too. I mean, by using different inputs, we can use the box in new and exciting ways too.
Yeah, so here's some action shots. I think we have a couple more of the kids using RFID tags on the boxes and activating them. And then all of us were out there, all 4 of us were working with the kids along with the teachers. And we made answer guides and everything for the teachers to be able to help them as well. And really just having as much one-on-one connection with the kids in addition to the experience. So we weren't just sending them off to do it by themselves.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about that, I hadn't seen these pictures in a while, and that just seeing them now, it kind of like, it makes me miss those kids. You really, like you saw kids from week to week, because a lot of the kids, some were new, some saw a few weeks, whatever, but a lot of the kids were there all 10 weeks, and you kind of got to know them, and you kind of got to know who was going to be interested in what activity, and it really was a lot of joy. Not just it was a lot of hard work being there and out there and walking and carrying things and setting it up, but it was also a lot of joy in seeing the kids from week to week and seeing how happy they were to see us. A lot of the kids thought I slept in these particular places because they only saw me there, and I just figured I'd keep the story going because why not?
Yeah, we live outside.
Yes.
The payoffs were huge. I mean,
huge.
Yeah. And I think we all had different payoffs too. Like for me, there were some kids that no discredit to the creative, but they got so excited about the internals when, we would open a box.
Oh yeah.
Those are the ones that I get really excited about. Like,
yes.
Oh yes, future technologists. That's great.
Yeah. Well, and for the engineering themed week, we even started off with Stosh explaining how the boxes work, because why not? That was kind of part of what the kids were doing, was understanding how things work. And so we broke the story for those moments on purpose because it made sense. And yeah, just more action shots, just really observing the kids. And we included a lot of very tactile, low tech things like coloring. There was a week about invention and being an inventor. And so they had to make their own invention at the end, which was not based on anything they did at the 8 stations, other than they learned about 8 iconic inventions that they wouldn't normally learn about in school. I specifically picked inventions by a very diverse set of people so that they would be exposed to more than they might have heard about in the classroom. And hopefully that inspired them to make more exciting inventions of their own and see themselves in the inventors, so they understood that they truly could be inventors. Yeah, here's us handing out the rewards to the kids. Man, do they just like fight over getting them at the end.
You can never have enough stickers.
Yeah, man, and they like bargain for stickers too, but they loved it. I mean, the kids just were so amazing to work with. And there's Lauren in the center. She like, with the white mask hanging off her arm, she was the most enthusiastic about being outside. She had like this little hiking outfit the first week, and it was just like, I always looked to her to be like the leader of excitement of what was going on in the week. And the teachers loved it too. They really loved getting to work with us and being able to see the kids be in a completely different learning environment. And they've asked us again to come back this next summer and do kind of version 2 of these interactive scavenger hunts with them for their summer camp, which is super, super exciting on our part, because all the things that, you know, as creators, you see all the problems and you want to fix them. And so that's our goal this summer, is to take all of those things we wished we could do or weren't working the way we wanted and do a new iteration of it. And yeah, we loved it. We also survived because it was a lot of work. And we got support from Stash's former intern in that picture right next to him. My husband did so much work behind the scenes. He 3D printed most of those tokens for me and was a huge, huge part of it. And then Stash's son also helped us out on a ton of the weeks working with the kids.
And what's really one last sort of thought about YAA is that you can see that in this, what's the generic sort of theme here for back to themed entertainment: storytelling and tying together an experience from beginning to end for the kids. Yes, there was technology. Yes, we used some of that, but ultimately it was about the theme, their experience learning, and competing in a way with each other because some of them wanted to do it faster than others and so on. But ultimately, that story that got them from beginning to end, and they all left learning or having learned things they didn't know before, experiencing the outdoor and so on. So story. It was all about the story and the experience going through that story for them, and in fact for us as well, going through that story with them from our own point of view.
I love the way kids' brains work.
Yes.
It's just like one speed and it's go, but like in every direction. It's so great.
Well, they're not bounded either, right? Like they'll ask any question. So I mean,
And they'll tell you how they feel.
Why do you have a beard? Like,
right?
I asked you if you had any questions about this device, but sure, we'll go with that.
So you guys had the opportunity to have some really good feedback that came in from the kids that came in and did the play test and also went through this experience. What are some of the key learnings and advice for building an experience similar to this? Let's start with Erica.
Okay, so I'll continue on just how important playtesting is. So I had already learned this in my previous work. We did a lot of playtesting in Super Nintendo World. It was absolutely instrumental to the experience that we created. And it proved itself again and again in its importance when we were using it in young innovators. And I think that it's not just the idea of playtesting, it's understanding that you might be confident in your idea of what you're designing, but you really just don't know how the guest is going to react to it until you test it. You have only lived your one life. So you need to bring in as many different people with as many different life experiences so that they can tell you how it feels for them and you can observe how it feels for them. And you can't do it too late. So obviously we were very lucky in Young Innovators where I could pivot that week and use those as learnings along the way. But in a large project like Nintendo, you have to do that playtesting early, because if you learn something huge, at a certain point, you can't change it. It's already in concrete, or so many other factors have happened, or it's too expensive. And even in Young Innovators, there were things that we learned too late to make a change that summer, and we hope to be able to learn from and change this summer. But it's just so important to think about playtesting from the very beginning. And as simple as just a paper playtest, just grab a highlighter and a piece of cardboard and scribble it out and make people play it, all the way through like a full mock-up and building out the entire space and spending that investment, because you can learn so much from answering those different questions all along the way. Playtest many times.
Yeah, I think the value of mock-ups and putting together experiences or analogs that are close enough so that you get the impression from guests is underrated. I think we should do that a lot more. And also, something I always tell myself is, I am not my audience, right? Like you are not your audience, and this is something that creative teams and technology teams and themed entertainment need to remind themselves of. It's not what that team thinks or what somebody in particular in an organization might think. You've got to go to your audience and you've got to test it with them. Comedians know this, by the way. This is why comedians do stand up are out there so much in smaller venues, always testing their jokes, because you might think it's hilarious and then you say it in a group and it bombs. So,
well, Eric, I think that leads really well into something that you always talk about, of measuring everything too. Like, it's not just playtesting ahead of time, but it's knowing what happened.
yeah, absolutely. And to me, like, measuring everything is not going to be asked of you in the technology realm. I think the creative teams will always say, "Oh, we want to do these amazing creative things," and it is your role as a technologist to then say, "That's amazing, we'll do it." But here's how we're going to measure how long it took, how well it went, how successful it was, and so on. And you have to bake that into your systems so that you can then show data back and say, hey, here's what we saw. In fact, I don't, without getting into the specifics, there were some installations we've done over the last few years where having measurements about how long things took to go from A to B, or that data indeed was received at some ultimate system, was incredibly important during commissioning, so that we could figure out very quickly where a problem was. I'm talking, in these systems, you might have 5, 6 vendors that participated in a chain to make something happen. And so the fact that we had data that showed us what had happened with all that technology, from the point that a guest did something all the way through 5 different vendor systems to the ultimate destination, and we could show how long it took, where it was, and find the bottlenecks very quickly. Without having those measurements in place, this would have been days, if not weeks, of discussions and whose system is it, and so on and so forth. So measure everything. Just data and analytics are your friend. This is something I bring from the enterprise world, but data and analytics are your friend. Just measure it all.
So, I mean, really jumping off of that, not only from an analytics side point or standpoint, but really measuring everything allows you to reinforce your decision making down the road for live
Yes.
operations. So, another aspect of what Eric's talking about is watch the fall off, right? So, if you're capturing everything, every detail about an attraction, you start to see a natural degradation of character selection, maybe 2 or 3 years after a movie's been out. So maybe it's time to bump that character out of rotation and put in a new character to freshen the guest experience in that ride. And that's where we're starting to see things move now, is that ability to introduce new content into existing attractions without necessarily doing a complete retheme. I think we'll see more of that in the future, especially as we start to tie in more of that mobile and connected experience. But one of the lessons learned for me that really the onset of all of your projects, and the way we break things down is divisions of work, and it's really tricky. Sometimes we decide that we'll build a game on site, like we don't know what the physical building is going to be like, and that's kind of tricky. But partnering with your other divisions, audio, show set, lighting, is critical to do as early as possible so that you all have a cohesive approach to what your timelines really mean when you're doing an install. For us as the interactive component, we're normally the last ones in a building before it goes to operations and then to guests. So if there's a delay, it normally looks like us. And that's not to throw anybody under the bus, but that's just the perception, right? Where, maybe there was a miscommunication about a different timeline for construction per se. And you have to factor all that in. So you can't work in a bubble. You've really got to be on site from the get-go. Even if it's 3 years out, you might not think it's important, but where that conduit pokes up out of that concrete is important, and it's expensive to chip up concrete. And Erica kind of alluded to that early on, talking about Wizarding World, like, oh yeah, well, we want this interactive to be 20 feet to the left. Yeah, that's a lot more expensive now. The conduit's there.
It's possible, but it's expensive. I know.
Okay, so having experienced having to move stuff after the fact, I completely get that. However, I have other questions because we've alluded to an article that you wrote and like you're guiding 7 principles, and I would really like, just for me personally, and I'm assuming our viewers are going to be obsessed with it after you mention it or if you go through it, but I really wanted you to walk us through what those are if you can.
Yeah. So it was very interesting to try to distill it all down, and the 7 main principles that I came up with, and I've since tried to apply in Danielle and I were running a workshop, and we actually used them to run the workshop, and it worked really well. You've heard this the whole time. 1 is start with story. Everything is based on the story. That is the foundation. It's your guide the entire way, but it's not the literal plot points of the story necessarily. It's the themes. It is really thinking of it as that through line of every time you get to somewhere where there's a question of, does this need to be cut? This has to change. What other ramifications are there? You can always go back to the story because you know it so inherently, and it will guide you in the answer to every one of those questions. And the second principle, which is really the heart of the whole thing, and if you do nothing else, it's the most important thing, is to fulfill the wish. So I've thought a lot about wish fulfillment. My friend Umberto and I talk a lot about it, and my coworker David and I talk a lot about it, of this idea that there is, whether you know it or not, there's some wish that you have as a human in everything that you do, even outside of visiting a themed experience. But then if you layer that into the story, now you have this desire to cast magical spells, and you are now within a world where that makes sense and it's grounded in a storyline, and you're able to fulfill the wish of the guest. But it's not even just that. It's being able to taste iconic treats from the movie that you might have seen, or do amazing feats that you did as an avatar within a video game, but now in real life. And really thinking through as a designer, what are those wishes that the guest wants fulfilled before they leave for the day, so that no matter what else happened, if anything else went wrong, it still feels amazing because they got to experience that. So that one I could talk about forever. The third principle is define the roles, because guests really need to understand what they are expected of and what they should be doing, what they have permission to do inside of that world. And I really think about it like when you go to a party you can have just an open space where there's no real guidance or host, and you might have a good time, you might not have a good time. But if there is a really great host at that party who's curating the event and coming up with different things and letting the guests at the party know what they should and shouldn't be doing and inviting them to participate, it is so much more amazing, and you generally will have a better experience in an event like that. And so when you think about like, what is the role, where does the story start and stop, and helping them understand what their place is inside that world, it will feel more real and let them get rid of some of their inhibitions. The fourth principle is entice all senses. So we're physical people, we live in a physical world, we're making physical experiences that may have digital support, but really we rely on the senses that we have as humans to interpret the world and for the world to feel real. And that it's not just one sense at a time. So one thing I always love to reiterate is that you really want to pair visual and auditory together, because not every person has both of those senses available to them. And so you make it possible for everyone to experience it, and then better for the people who are able to experience both. And don't forget about smell and taste and physical touch. But then even beyond physical senses, there are emotional senses, your sense of connection with other people, so many different parts to that. And so you have to think about all of those holistically, because that's what makes your fantasy world feel like a really cool version of the real world. The fifth principle is layer in the details. So for me, that's meaning in everything. If you're going to be creating a window display, if you're going to be thinking about what you're going to be building in that space, well, it should all support the story. It should all have those parts to it. And there's a lot more factors in there, but I think that's really the core of it, is using those details within the world to direct people, to help them understand their place within it, and to bring that story to life. The sixth one is, I mentioned earlier, set up the payoff. Super, super important to celebrate, because in the real world, everything is messy. There's no reason for what we do. But in this fantasy world, because we're story-driven creatures, we can fulfill that wish of there being a climax to the experience, there being something that brings it all together and gave purpose for why you were here that day, and meaning to the actions that you took. So that's super, super important. And the last principle is to keep it fresh, to really make sure that you are building it for maintenance in mind, that you are creating these experiences to change with people so that each time they come back, there's a little bit different. There are seasonal events that happen because it's a real place. It's a living place that you've created, and it should feel that way, and be able to not only change for the people who are in the park, but be possible to maintain for the people who are supporting and operating the park. And both of those go super hand in hand.
I know that we sent a link to our viewers, and that it's going to live on in perpetuity. But I have it now saved in my bookmarks. I feel like I'm going to print it off and be like, make a graphic for it. So thank you for that. Thank you for summarizing what we should be doing intuitively, because I think having something broken down into digestible parts is like eating the elephant. Like, how do you do it one bite at a time? And you've just kind of summarized it nicely. So I appreciate that for all of us. When we talk about Valtech and how y'all have contributed to like the world, y'all did something at IAPA this year that I thought was one of the coolest experiences, one of the coolest invites that people could get, and it was the pivot party. Would someone like to talk about that? Because
Yeah,
it was cool.
sure. I mean, pandemic pivots. So I mean, we were kind of thinking about how our lives had changed during the pandemic, and there's certainly a lot of negativity that you could look at, but then there were a couple of really unique success stories of things that might not have happened if people hadn't started spending so much time at home. So we kind of chose that theme as a way to celebrate those groups or individuals that really stepped up and harnessed all of that time that they suddenly had to make some really cool technology, or to show how much they cared about their people. We celebrated one company that was able to take all of their learnings from theme parks and apply it to a completely different business model, with Brilliant Campers. And you know they kept all of their people on during the entire pandemic, which to me is just absolutely amazing. And being friends with them and having worked with them on a couple projects, I was like, we need a way for people to tell those stories. For me personally, there's been, well, I mean, for all of us, over the age of 20, um, 9/11 was a huge catastrophe, but for some of us, it was a way to go and do something that we didn't think we would ever do. Like, I never thought I would work in government or defense. But after 9/11, I did that. After the pandemic started, I was really, really nervous, with what the future held for interactive experiences, right? All of a sudden, everybody was afraid to touch things. So, how could we take that and push the technology forward? So, we really started looking at ways to reduce touchy feely things and use cameras, and gesture recognition to start integrating new experiences. So I think the real point is, if there's something catastrophic in your life, it doesn't always have to be a negative. Sometimes you can use that as a springboard to do something really new and inventive, and not take it at face value. So I think right now we're kind of showing some of the photos from the pivot party, and we wanted to invite people to share those experiences with us. And we had a number of partners that shared all of the new technology that they were able to develop uh, during COVID, when everybody was kind of work at home, or minimal number of people in shops. And it really was interesting to see all of the cool technology, and advancements that came out of that time.
Yeah, and Stash, I personally found inspiration from the folks that went and did other things that they just comfort. You know, what's that saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. And they just found themselves in a situation where it's like, well, got nothing to lose. Let me try something new. And in fact, those have now become their new careers, or their new focus, or the new area where they're going to make a living. So I was particularly inspired by a few of those stories.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was like looking at all the people in those pictures and was like, oh my god, I know them.
I know that guy.
Gosh. This has legitimately been one of the coolest shows and like we say that almost every show. We're like, oh, this is a cool show, but like as a creative who admires, the technical people so much, to see technical people being able to soar creatively, I think is really kind of inspiring, and I appreciate it. Anyway, Kathy, do you is Kathy frozen? Oh no, she's not.
No, I'm just here. I was listening. I really wish I had the opportunity to attend that. It seems like you guys were able to really look at ways of seeing the bright side of this experience that we had during COVID. And I know that it affected a lot of us who are in themed entertainment. So that was definitely like a bright spotlight that has a positive effect, which there's yeah. Yeah, I think that's absolutely amazing. So thank you guys so much. This has been an amazing experience to be able to speak to you guys. And I really think the playtesting and how everyone's disciplines came together during that was very insightful and eye-opening for me, especially as a designer. So anything else, Kelly?
Nope. I'm going to be reading all afternoon. So,
Well, yes, same.
Thank you so much for having us. This was so much fun on our end as well.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk about what we do because it's not always understood.
Very cool. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us.